This is episode 719 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drengmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Wally, and listeners, or more likely viewers, if you notice a difference, we're doing things a little differently this week. I am traveling at a school choice education reform related event in Salt Lake City. So I have a little different background here than Wally has in the usual background because of that particular trip. But as usual, there's plenty going on and plenty to discuss in New Mexico politics. So thanks for being flexible with me, Wally.
Yeah, it's good to talk to you from afar, Paul.
Yeah, first thing I wanted to talk about was a story that ran in the Albuquerque Journal on Wednesday. And the long and short of it is that it was about a group of business leaders from Albuquerque who traveled over to Phoenix. And they are looking at a variety of differences between Phoenix, Arizona, and Albuquerque, New Mexico. And unfortunately, as is so often the case, it does seem like the things they're discussing over there in Phoenix really aren't at the nub of the issue. The things that they are talking about involve Arizona State has a campus in downtown Phoenix. If you're familiar with Arizona State, it's in Tempe, which is kind of a suburb of Phoenix. They apparently put a campus in downtown Phoenix that some say made a big difference. Then there's the tax increment financing or the business improvement districts, TIF or bids that are used in Phoenix and that we have as TIDS here, TIDDS in Albuquerque. And there's a bid which is actively being considered here for downtown Albuquerque. And, these are interesting ideas, but as I wrote in the Albuquerque Journal on Sunday and wrote in a separate blog post, actually that Wednesday evening, I don't really think they're hitting the heart of the issue. But before we get there, Wally, want to just, talk a little bit about Phoenix. I'm sure you've spent your fair share of time in Phoenix, Arizona, and in the state of Arizona in general. It's a diverse, economically successful state, and successful states breed successful cities. And I that's where I'm going to focus my attention. But, you've undoubtedly traveled there. So tell me,
Yeah,
Wally.
well, it's a tad warm. That I always notice that, and not to get too deep into Catholic theology, if it's not he double hockey sticks, it's at least purgatory when you go there. It's a warm place, but yeah, there's a lot of businesses there. So I used to work for a company that was headquartered in Phoenix. I've spent quite a bit of time there. And one of the things that I believe that it has Phoenix itself has going for it that Albuquerque doesn't is it's not afraid to grow, and it's not as landlocked by various either Sandias on the one side, Pueblo lands to the north and south like Albuquerque, and so there's breathing room, if you will, and not to use the term in the sense that our certain German friends did in the 30s, but they have room to grow. And then the business climate there is tremendously different than it is in New Mexico. Uh, Way more positive towards business, which means a little better tax structure, not so onerous of regulations. The regulations that they have tend to be enforced a little more expeditiously and rationally, and don't do as much damage to business. And so and then it is a big dynamic place where you can get a lot of there's a lot of people there with a lot of skills, and if you're starting up a business there, you can a lot of times do quite a bit of recruiting from quality people within the valley there that Phoenix sits in.
Yeah, well, you mentioned the business climate, and that's where I focused my attention in the Albuquerque Journal piece, as well as a separate blog post, both of which are now at airsofenchantment.com. So just going to run through a few of these. Arizona, it has a top personal income tax rate, 2.5%. New Mexico's is 5.9%. I don't think it requires much guesswork to know that more people are going to go to a 2.5% top income tax rate than they are to New Mexico's much higher rate. I know Arizona's at least interested, or under their previous governor, Doug Ducey, wanted to move towards 0% income tax, but where they are is much better than where New Mexico is. Arizona is a right to work state, which still matters. It's not as big of a deal as it used to be before the Supreme Court gave public employees the right to choose whether to join to be in a union or pay union dues or not. But private sector right to work is still relevant, and Arizona is right to work. New Mexico is not. Arizona does have a relatively high sales tax rate of 8.38%, but they do not have a harmful gross receipts tax like New Mexico's. And I want to have a philosophical discussion with you about that, Wally, because I think Albuquerque is at 7.675.
7.625.
625,
Yep.
yes. Uh, I have an interesting proposition for you relating to that. Talk about later on. Arizona has no prevailing wage law, while New Mexico does. In fact, in an interesting twist, due to a state law, those prevailing wages are expanded in New Mexico to projects that receive what are called industrial revenue bonds. It's an economic inducement. We talked about it during and after the legislative session and the problems it's going to create. But Arizona does not have a prevailing wage law, which artificially increases the price of public works projects. Arizona has a higher labor force participation rate, thanks in part to having fewer people on those government benefits. And of course, we all know about the Medicaid program. And Arizona has 10 companies listed in the Fortune 500. Two of those you've probably heard of are Freeport McMoran, the mining outfit, and Carvana, which of course is a car selling uh, you know, website or store. New Mexico has just 3 publicly traded companies headquartered in the state, including, of course, the utility P&M, by far the largest, and that is being considered for sale. Arizona's crime, while high relative to the U.S., is nowhere near as high as New Mexico's. Arizona's K-12 system is one of the leading choice-oriented education systems. And get this, Wally, this was shocking even to me. Arizona spends 45% less per K-12 student, even while outperforming us. 45%. That's unbelievable. And then finally, and I could have gone on, but I didn't. Despite New Mexico's delegation looking to further expand this delegation on a congressional one, our higher ed footprint with a new campus downtown, Arizona spends about 1/3 what New Mexico does per student in higher education. So some pretty stark differences there, Wally. And we could go over to Texas, we could go to Colorado, we could go to Utah and have similar discussions. But since they're flying over to Phoenix, I figured Phoenix was the appropriate model and Arizona was the appropriate model.
Yeah, Paul, and when you look at higher education and the number of institutions, it's there are so many 4-year colleges in New Mexico, and then they all have branches, and it's like the branches have branches. Arizona, it just shows what happens with a couple of centralized schools that have, albeit big populations, but are successful at a lot lower price. And I know this will come out. It's not like we compliment California very often. But even look at the California system, given the population of California, how few state institutions they have, and what does it cost them to run relative to New Mexico? If New Mexico had the population of California, we'd have 200 or 300 colleges and branches in our state. It's that much of an oversupply situation here.
Yeah, and it's not like UNM, if you're familiar at all with the city of Albuquerque. Yes, UNM's main campus is not located downtown in Albuquerque, but boy, it's not far away from downtown. It's really, especially given the demographics and the lack of kind of reason to be in downtown, it makes very little sense to stick a UNM branch campus downtown. I mean, you've got CNM, which is right up the road too. It's just it's another government solution to a problem that is not really due to want of government. It's due to a lack of people wanting to be in downtown Albuquerque. Now, Wally, here's my hypothetical for you. 8.38 on the sales tax is higher than New Mexico's, or in this case, we'll just use Albuquerque as a proxy. I think their 8.38 sales tax in Arizona is across the board, which is something that we could debate here, but we obviously have widely varying gross receipts tax rates in the state of New Mexico. Albuquerque is actually on the low side because we have such a large agglomeration of businesses relative to most parts of the state. So at 7.625, we are somewhat lower. As a small businessman, Wally, would you prefer to do business in Arizona at the 8.38% sales tax rate, or the gross receipts tax being slightly lower, but it is a gross receipts tax? What's your take, generally speaking, and if you want to add your own personal experience there, given your high amounts of gross receipts taxable income yourself?
Yeah, and Paul, I'll start there, but let me just say that as a small or a medium or even a large businessman, I've worked for entities of various sizes and all different kinds, and all of them were dramatically impacted negatively by the gross receipts tax. And so I would, I would not only in a heartbeat trade a slightly higher sales tax for the existing gross receipts tax rate as long as it was fully reformed, as well as a lot of the businesses that I consult for, am associated with, work with. There's one organization that we're looking at how we grow, and the gross receipts tax is just playing a huge negative part of our next phase, to the point where we're having to look to do some work in some surrounding states other than New Mexico. And believe me, that's the last thing I want to, that we want to do. But when you look at a lot of the things we have in terms of, not only the higher state income tax, but that gross receipts tax that just makes services that you sell and services that you buy that much more expensive. Our money just does not go very far when you're doing a developing or growing business in New Mexico, at least of the kinds I've been associated with.
I totally agree with you and understand, and I think that highlights the harm that the GRT does to small businesses like yourself and like others in New Mexico. Not that we would advocate for that per se, because quite honestly, the gross receipts tax problem in New Mexico is not a revenue problem per se at the state level. It is a local revenue problem. And the way the gross receipts tax, when you change its makeup, you really have to change the way local governments, many of whom have very limited tax bases, where they get their money. We, of course, have plenty of money in New Mexico, but it's making the policy decision to help them out at the local level so that you can make New Mexico a more business friendly state. I would not advocate, and I think it would be a non starter, simply going to the similar tax rate as Arizona has, making it a straight sales tax, because you would then wind up really messing up, for lack of a better word, local government's revenue pictures, because of the way the gross receipts tax is currently calculated, the businesses it impacts versus those that it does not.
Well, and Paul, I've done a lot of thinking about this and done a bit of study. And I think what happens is the smallest communities probably aren't hurt that poorly because the percentage of, you know, if you're a small place in Northeast New Mexico that has an Allsups and, a couple stores, there's not a lot of service businesses going on out there. And so maybe you're doing okay. Bigger cities like Albuquerque, Santa Fe, Las Cruces, they would, their economies would definitely grow on the service side if there wasn't a gross receipts tax, and I think very quickly earn that back, if not almost immediately. But some of the ones in the middle might be hurt. And then when we look at what we've done to manage it, we took gross receipts tax off of food, and we've already told those counties and smaller communities, we're going to make you whole, the hold harmless. And then that promise did not last too long. And so to say there's some hesitancy out there in the hinterlands of New Mexico to more adjustment to gross receipts tax, I think that's putting it mildly.
Yeah. Uh, well, anyway, there's a lot that we can do by emulating a lot of what Arizona does. And much of that is directly related to our next topic, which is economic freedom. Uh, we had a excellent luncheon on Wednesday with Matthew Mitchell of the Fraser Institute, a Canadian think tank. He works on economic freedom issues, and we co-authored a report earlier this year relating to New Mexico's decline in economic freedom. That report remains available on the Heirs of Enchantment and Rio Grande Foundation websites, as does now Mitchell's uh, slides from his presentation on Wednesday, his interview with Bob Clark, which is on heirsofenchantment.com and Rio Grande Foundation.org, and finally on Tipping Points nm.com, episode 692, Matthew Mitchell's podcast recording that when we talked to him this past fall. So just tooting our own horn a little bit. It was a really nice event. I know it's a great opportunity to get folks together and have these important conversations, but my hope is that with a friendly organization like Americans for Prosperity, we may be able to get Mitchell out to different places around New Mexico, spreading the important message of economic freedom. And really nice to have somebody who's so conversant with New Mexico issues, because Matt grew up here. He lives in Angel Fire, New Mexico right now, and really understands New Mexico and its many challenges. But really a great presentation, and check out those slides. They have a lot of really interesting data and information associated with them.
Yeah, Paul, and it's interesting just to put a fine point on that. Why does this matter? Is how highly correlated economic freedom is to economic success, whether it be workforce participation rate, low unemployment, high wages, all of that, as opposed to the contrary, where it's interesting. Many of the things that get you demerits on the economic freedom are things that, if you just hear them and you don't think about them, it's like, oh yeah, that probably helps. It's like a lot of those things in places like New Mexico, a lot of these small incremental quote unquote helping, and I am using the air quotes figuratively, they've kind of helped us getting close to last place. And we maybe need fewer of those because you don't have to look very far to see, this is not something, this is not a one off, if you will, where there's something so unique about New Mexico that having better economic freedom wouldn't do an awful lot for our economy.
Yeah, absolutely. And just for the record, Arizona is by no means a perfect exponent of economic freedom in the Fraser Institute or any other reports. New Hampshire tends to be at the very top of those lists because they have no personal income and no sales tax. Uh, of course, you don't have to look very far to find places that are more economically free than is New Mexico. And really, that is the issue because it's not just about a number or some arcane vision of freedom. This is what makes New Mexico 50th and 49th and so challenged in so many ways. And of course, uh, playing into all of this is we have plenty of oil and gas money. We have the revenue to do some really bold things, but we don't elect people who are willing or interested in doing the bold things. So uh, Matt Mitchell brings that up in his presentation as well. We discussed that in the paper. And I think it's a really thorough analysis of why New Mexico has kind of gotten itself in this difficult situation. And it's sad to say it's a difficult situation that really needs a political solution to be resolved. Wally, a report came out early last week, and it caught my attention. Federal issues, of course, not as central to what we do, but when you're talking about something like Social Security, especially when you can go back to 2005 or so and show the huge difference in how things could have been, what could have been if George W. Bush and Paul Ryan and John Sununu had been able to push through the Social Security reforms that they were considering in Congress at that time. And of course, as the head of the Rio Grande Foundation, many times I get to say, I told you so. I told you ART was a bad idea. I told you film subsidies weren't a good idea. I told you the rail runner and the spaceport were going to be wastes of money. And we could go on. Well, very much at the time, while I was in Washington, we were supportive of personal accounts for Social Security and the reforms that could have been implemented then. Unfortunately, they were not, and we're stuck with a system that is uh, continuing to go further and further into red ink and produce inferior returns to what would have been done with the personal account. So I'll read through this briefly and then get your input, Wally. So this post, it's a chart from the Committee to Unleash Prosperity. The title is 20 Years After Democrats Killed Personal Accounts. They look at Bush's personal account value and the contributions, which would have been different from the Ryan Sununu plan. The Ryan Sununu plan has a higher contribution value. So basically, the Bush plan was median worker over the last 20 years, 31,000 in contributions. Ryan Sununu was 49,000, nearly $50,000. But The Bush plan would have created a personal account that would have been worth nearly $120,000 to the median worker. Ryan Sununu, with the higher contribution amount, also invested, would have been $191,000. So ultimately, this is a plan that would have, reformed a system that is now facing $28 trillion in unfunded obligations. It would have set us on a glide path to, all having these individual accounts, which would have been a much better way for us all to retire. But unfortunately, we stuck with the crappy returns of the individual, the Social Security system as it stood before, without any individual accounts, and just the money not even really being invested, because you and I are paying money into people's, Social Security that's going out the door right now, and you're hoping for the best, Wally. Although I think your chances of getting a decent return on Social Security are somewhat better than mine, and I don't even know what to say about my kids. They're in deep trouble, and as are your kids, quite frankly, when it comes to Social Security. So uh, that's the dreary and unfortunate truth. But yeah, would have had a lot better outcome with those reforms. Your take, Wally?
Well, yeah, and Paul, there is absolutely no question about that. But there's a kind of a couple of things, and when I have thought about this issue in the past, and believe me, it's been a long time since I've thought about it. Uh, but the first is a thing from a branch of economics called consumer economics, where how much greater a consumer's preference is for a certain outcome can compared to an uncertain outcome, even if the one that's uncertain, like the rates of return in investment, there's some uncertainty there, but over time, it's far better than what you would have gotten with Social Security. But there is something in the human psyche about that, and then there's just a undeserved uh, trust in government on these programs, because what happened, you know close to 30 years ago, if I'm doing my math right, corporate America was forced to deal with what it was going to really cost for them to fund their pension programs and the amount of money they were going to have to spend. And they said, we cannot take that risk. It will bankrupt our companies to do this potentially. So we're going to switch from pension plans to the 401ks and the like. Well, the federal government just stuck with the same old system. We here's the plan that we're promising this, but the funds to back that up are nowhere to be found. And so, it has some echoes of the old Soviet Union, where when Ronald Reagan used to make fun of them, it's easy enough to promise a benefit, but actually funding that benefit over time in an uncertain world, with inflation, a lot of which is caused by the very government that makes these promises, is not, that's the real risk, as I think you well pointed out.
Yeah, and of course, 20 plus years later, it only becomes more and more difficult to actually push for needed reform, because we're that much further into, debt, if you will. There's just more and more challenges to reforming the system than there were before. And, uh, it's one of, Trump's kind of, I think, blind spots, or, the things that he did run on, but he was basically saying that he was not going to touch Social Security, which needs to be touched. And not a diehard fan. I've looked at all this stuff going back to my days with the National Taxpayers Union. I understand the arguments for increasing the retirement age. I think that is a way to do things, but I think the much better way is to boost those returns, to give people those accounts that they can hang their hats on for retirements in a much more realistic way. And I'm as we discussed, Wally, I just turned 50, and for years I've been telling people that I would gladly give every penny that I've paid in Social Security to the program if I can just invest money that I would otherwise be spending or paying into Social Security in the future. And while that window is closing for me, I still would do that because I think the return on money that I would earn for the rest of my working days would still get me to a better place than that all the money I've paid into Social Security into the past would give me. So it's a deal that I don't expect the federal government to take me up on, but it would be a heck of a deal, I think.
Well, raising the retirement age from 65 and then to 67, there's a limit to how much you can continue to do that. Obviously, if we make the retirement age 100, you don't get any money until you turn 100. Obviously, that would solve the problem. But also, there does come a point where it is very difficult to work, and that happens way before you get to be 100, at least in my limited life experience of knowing people's in their 80s, 90s, and getting close to the triple digits.
No doubt, Wally, there is a big difference between extended lifespans versus extending your work workable life. And obviously, we're not working here in a factory hammering out widgets or mining deep underground. So you and I could probably do this particular aspect of our jobs for a very long time, but probably not something we were inclined to do much past 70, for example. Although you can be president of the United States, President Trump just turned 79 there with that big birthday parade that all the liberals are upset about in Washington, D.C. Just kidding. It was the Army's 250th birthday, not really Trump's. But, it is something to consider. 79 being the president of the United States. Of course, Biden was running and he was even more advanced in age, et cetera. So that's just not, I don't think, the best solution. I think the best solutions are win-win. Eliminating or increasing the retirement age is more of it just penalizes people at that level. So a story that we helped to break, at least so far as it made its way into the Santa Fe New Mexican, thanks to Daniel Chacon and his Roundhouse Report article about it. We alerted him that we'd received information indicating that the New Mexico Department of Information Technology has implemented a new email retention policy in which deleted emails will now be permanently purged after just 1 month. That is a very quick deletion policy, and it makes the ability for average citizens, media outlets, you name it, it's just going to get more and more difficult for people to get information out of government. You can bet your bottom dollar that, especially this governor, but anyone running for or anyone in the governor's position will be deleting a lot of emails because they can perma delete them after just 30 days. So I think it's a very significant problem for transparency.
Yeah, I think it's huge. It's basically applying a Snapchat like logic to email. And so, I think when I saw that, I mean, I was like, it takes a bit for my eyebrows to raise when I read a story about something the state of New Mexico is doing. I have a pretty high tolerance, but I was like, whoa, mighty bold. Let's just get rid of the IPRA process and just not have any, you can't get any information out of the government because that would be a tremendously big first step if that were your goal.
Yeah, exactly. It is a great way to limit the ability for people to gain information on what's going on in government. Last story we have here, the city of Albuquerque has a mayoral race officially set. 7 candidates, so total. Of course, that's Mayor Tim Keller, as well as the other candidates, Luis Sanchez, the city councilor, Mailing Armijo, who was on this show last week, Darren White, uh, Andrew Ubaez, Eddie Varela, and Daniel Chavez, who he is a parking lot businessman. Of course, we talked about public financing, the fact that Tim Keller, mayor, has managed to succeed in getting that. He is the only mayoral candidate getting the public financing. Of course, that's $750,000, which is in addition to what undoubtedly will be essentially PACs doing business on behalf of Mayor Keller. We talked fairly extensively about how we see this race going, but I think, Wally, as we conclude here, I see it as best case scenario. Realistically, it's Keller versus one of the moderates in the race. By moderate, I mean anybody except for Ubaez. Worst case scenario is we get 2 progressives running against each other in a runoff for the mayoral race. I don't see anybody getting 50% plus 1 to avoid a runoff, but Ubaez is a serious candidate, and he, if anything, is possibly to the left of Keller, which would be a just devastating result for the mayor's race. So we'll see how this pans out. But any thoughts on these candidates?
Well, it is interesting. We do have a wide range of candidates, and it's going to be interesting to see what the electorate does in Albuquerque. Sometimes I sort of think that it's kind of like in sports, people just cheer for the jerseys. It doesn't matter who's in them or whether they're winning or losing. That's their team. And Mayor Keller's gotten elected a couple of times, and I'm not saying I think for sure it's going to happen, but that is something you have to take into account where really policy and how the city's being run becomes much less of an issue than some sort of political beauty contest or popularity contest. If it were, it's like, oh, we like him, he's our guy, and so, or woman in this case, we do have a woman candidate, so it will be interesting to see. And yes, the scenarios you presented, I have a feeling the runoff is very, very likely. I just don't see any candidate getting to 50% in its current format, even with Keller being in the race. He's probably has, the best chance, but there's a lot of grumblings. There's frustration with the current mayor from the left and the right, and that can bring a lot of uncertainty in the race for sure.
Yeah, and of course, had Mailing Armijo on the show recently, so folks can check that out. Eddie Varela as well was on a few months ago. We're going to have Daniel Chavez on soon. I hereby explicitly invite the other candidates to appear on this show. I would love to have everybody, including Mayor Keller, which I suspect he's not interested, Andrew Ubaez, which I also suspect he's not interested, but also Luis Sanchez and Darren White as well. I think it's going to be a very interesting race, and we will be working to educate. Of course, we've got the candidate survey, so folks should go, whether they're running for mayor or city council, and check out our candidate survey, as well as the results so far from Dan Lewis, city councilor, and Mailing Armijo, who's running for mayor. So with that, thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.